I'm Mark Bregman. I'm the CTO at NetApp. I joined NetApp just last September, so I've been with the company a little over 6 months. I have a long and varied background in the tech industry. I started at IBM Research doing physics, and then I moved into semiconductors, and then systems, and then software, and a number of things. And then I got the itch to go do something, unfortunately, about 9 minutes after the peak of the dot-com bubble. I joined a startup in 2000 in New York that was doing content distribution. We shut that down after 9/11, which was the day I was supposed to leave to do the roadshow to raise the next round. And then I moved out to the West Coast to join Veritas. So I've been sort of more on the software side, but around the storage space since early 2002, exclusively. Prior to that, when I ran the Unix business at IBM, we introduced Fiber Channel to the RS6000 and did a lot of other things related to storage. I stayed on with Veritas through the acquisition by Symantec and was the CTO of the combined company. Then I left to work for a company called Neustar in the telecom services space. And there was the first time I was sort of on the customer side. We weren't producing technology, but we were delivering services and really transforming that company from one that had a very, I guess I would call it, traditional enterprise IT view of the world to really a SaaS model. And so moved to a lot of common platform. This was starting around 2011. Started getting involved in a lot more open source. I've done a lot of that at IBM, but started to really bring in a lot of open source and build out more of a cloud-like infrastructure at that time. I left there in 2014, took a year off to write most of a book about innovation, which is not quite finished. And then last summer, really, just about this time last year, I met George Kurian, who was then running product operations at NetApp, and we had a discussion. A friend introduced us, mutual friend, about the challenge of innovation and change and transformation in a large technology company. And a few weeks later, he was named CEO, and a few weeks after that, they reached out and said, hey, would you like to talk to us about maybe joining the team? And I wasn't really looking for something because I wanted to finish my book, but it was so compelling that I felt like this is an opportunity I didn't want to miss. So why is NetApp compelling for somebody like me to join? I think one is strong customer base, that's important. Strong balance sheet, deep technology, great technical teams. And for me, we need to change the business. If we didn't need to change the business, I'd probably be bored and I wouldn't do it. So as I said, I've been with the company about a little over 6 months. So what are the factors that really drive us? I think they're driving NetApp, but they're really driving the industry. Probably the biggest one is cloud. Here we are, historically an on-prem storage system company, and customers are putting their data somewhere else. And so what does that mean? Second one is changing technology and the introduction of initially, going from rotating media, which we've been in for years and years, to flash, to new categories of flash like 3D crosspoint, storage class memories, et cetera, radically changing how we think about persistent storage of data. The third one is the category, the way we think about data is shifting. If you go back 10 years ago, storage was expensive, only store the most critical data. That data is so critical I have to make sure that I'm storing it on a highly reliable, highly available storage system, which makes it expensive. So there was a positive feedback loop that kept us from storing lots of data. Then there was a breakthrough. Somebody figured out that, hey, this big data, if we're storing large quantities of data and we're analyzing it statistically, maybe if we lose a little bit of it randomly, it's not so important. Maybe we don't need that super highly expensive, high quality storage. We can store it on lower cost storage. We can store more data. And there's a sort of separate feedback loop, if you will, on the big data front around data storage. So that's transforming our business. The last factor is really the changing application model. IDC calls it third platform, a term I don't particularly like. And I think they've munged together a bunch of factors which are influencing it. But to me, the fundamental shift is going back to enterprise sort of models of applications. Start with a rock solid foundation, go buy the name brand hardware, put high quality software on it, put in some middleware for high availability and management, and then write an app on top, and the app will be highly available because the underpinnings are highly available. And the model today is flipped almost on its head, which is assume that the underlying infrastructure is relatively unreliable and ensure that you build apps that can continue to process, deliver service, et cetera, in the face of underlying failures. Dramatic shift in the model. Enabled, because that's a very complex thing, by the development of key platforms. Initially, the hyperscalers kind of figured this out. And now it's coming to the rest of the industry through things like OpenStack that make this accessible so that model of rapid development, DevOps as an operating model, applications that are really managing their own service availability can be brought to the broader market. So that's sort of the environment we find ourselves in. So what does that mean for NetApp? I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing because I think it leads into why we're focused on open source generally and OpenStack more specifically, and then I'll turn it over to Rob. So as I said, when I joined about a little more than 6 months ago, one of the things that struck me right at the beginning was we have a broad portfolio of products and offerings, and yet we have a heritage for the last 20-some years of being almost a one-product company. We at one point figured out we shouldn't call it NAS, we'll call it FAS, but other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. It's an appliance, a storage appliance. Amazingly successful. I found a slide from Dave Hitz, it's probably 20 plus years old, that was one of the early, probably for an investor pitch. It said, we're going to go create a market for network attached storage and dominate it. And they did. The company did that. It's fantastic. But the world's changed. And so the first thing is looking at our portfolio, we have to learn as a company how to manage a multi-portfolio business. Treat different parts of our portfolio differently. Some of them are mature, they're embedded, they're in the customer. We have to deal with those in terms of how do we continue to support the customer, make them more cost effective, et cetera. Some of them are rapidly emerging. I mean, SolidFire is a great example of one of those high growth areas where we're going to constantly have to adapt to changing needs, find new use cases, adapt to competition, gain share. And some of them we're frankly still exploring. I would say OpenStack is a little bit beyond the exploration phase. It's getting to be a real thing. But there are some things we're talking about, we call data fabric, which we're still trying to figure out what it is, and it's exploratory. We have to manage across that spectrum. The second thing is, having been in the hardware and systems business and also in the software business, there are only a limited number of people inside the company that really think like software. Most of them think like hardware people or systems people. And it's a fundamentally different mindset. And so part of the transformation journey we have is moving that thought process, that culture, more towards the software world. You know, as Andreessen said, software is eating the world. It's also eating a lot of companies. And if we don't make that change, we're not going to be as nimble as we need to be. We're not going to be able to satisfy the changing needs. And we're not going to be part of that broader community of innovation community. So that's the key. And then the third thing is understanding how to operate in a different environment. Internally, I talk about it in terms of creating a platform, which is really what it is. But I think in this community, the real answer is how do we participate in a broader ecosystem? As a supporter of that with a platform that we may have, and as a participant in terms of working with lots of other partners to create value. And not in the traditional value chain model. You know, we'll do this, we'll sell it to someone who does something more, who sells it to someone who does something more, and then it gets sold to an end user. Or the other model, we'll acquire this technology and then we'll add value and then we'll sell it on. That's the traditional model. The new model, which some people are calling a platform business model, is we create something that enables different parties to create value and consume value. We may not be in the middle of that transaction. It's a lot like storage. We're not in the data path. We're in the control path. And we derive value by having more and more participants who want to use our platform and participate in this ecosystem, even though we're not directly in their individual economic value chain. And that's, again, something that's changing pretty dramatically. As I said earlier, open source is critical because open source in general is critical because it's going to accelerate the rate at which we can drive change and innovation and bring things to our customers. It's also important because it's a new way for us to essentially influence the direction outside of our company. The traditional way of building proprietary solutions and then fighting in the marketplace to gain market share, I think, is kind of over in the tech industry. The model of going to traditional standards committees and working through that process is too slow and is also essentially over. And so this model of collaborative innovation that drives the evolution of a direction which we can participate in is critical. OpenStack in particular is a piece of key infrastructure for us, both to supply into that market as a producer of storage and storage software, but also to consume and build upon to build higher level solutions for our customers and with our customers. So, you know, we have a team, and Rob can talk more about this. We have a team, it's not very big by comparison to the size of our company, but it's very active that's working with the OpenStack community and trying to particularly bring what we know, the knowledge we have in the storage world, and help bring that into the broader community. So I'm open for any quick questions you may have, and then I'll turn it over to Rob, who's going to answer all the technical questions. Or John will answer the ones that Rob can't answer. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. Yeah. You made a statement about bringing your storage world, your NetApp storage knowledge into the storage community. NetApp was one of the first companies that contributed a Cinder driver. Mm-hmm. Right, I think out of the storage companies, NetApp really held a leadership role, showing that and is completely self-serving at the time, which is healthy.
Enlightened self-interest, we like to think of it.
You know what? Either way,
most people in the open community.
Good for your business, good for your employees, good for the community. Win-win-win. Exactly. Happiness. So you mentioned on the last part there that you want to contribute more. What in your vision, I know it's only been 6 months there, what do you see as a meaningful contribution that NetApp is planning to, is thinking about, or can make? That'll be a win for NetApp, its customers, and the community members.
Well, so there's a delicate line here between what we're thinking about and what I don't want to commit to before we've worked through it internally. But clearly there are some data movement technologies that we've had in our core products for a long time, which we think are leadership and beneficial to a broader use case than owning a NetApp box. Yeah. How we get that out there is a challenge. And you guys have been around this world, and I've been around similar things, and it's always an interesting, delicate dialogue internally. Well, that's our unique crown jewels. We have to protect it. Versus if they're kept in the safe all the time and no one sees them, how valuable can they be, right? So how do we get through that? And I think has historically been, again, an observation, sort of first 6 months. NetApp has historically been extremely conservative around the controls and legal implications of open source. Not OpenStack specifically, but open source in general. And so I'm pushing pretty hard with our business and legal people to say, look, this is not a risk-only problem. This is a risk-benefit problem. And look at all the benefit we can gain if we take a little bit more risk. And in fact, in the software world, more than the hardware world, where the cycles are faster, my view is most of that risk is mitigated by just moving fast enough. Get something out there, and then in a year or two somebody's using your IP. Well, it doesn't matter. That was 2-year-old IP. I'm on to something else. Whereas in the traditional systems world, where the cycles are much longer, you're much more fearful of that. So that's one example.
Question/request on this, and it pertains to the OpenStack community. So maybe somewhere between 3 and 6 summits ago, one of the presentations I gave was just on this, on contributing as an operator. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that NetApp did do properly, and it's one of the first OpenStack ambassadors, and I used you guys, and I think it was Ben Schwarzman who was the first guy to contribute there, as an example to companies like EMC and others on why and how, in Storage Fire, for example, on why and how they should contribute back. Dave Cahill, I've known for a long time. But what hasn't been presented back to the community is a discussion of, as a large corporation who is making appliances and his lifeblood is on intellectual property, that decision-making process and the processes internally, and sharing that process, I think, could be a huge value to the community, as well as a bit of an insight into how NetApp operates.
That would be, I think I'm going to ask Rob to make a note of that, because I think that's actually a topic we can talk pretty openly about, because it's not exposing our IP, it's exposing our process. And frankly, I think having an open dialogue with the community about that will help influence us as well. And maybe we need to bring some of the folks that are on our legal/business side to participate in that, because they tend to be isolated talking to other lawyers, and that's not necessarily the right feedback loop. Yes. So that's a very good insight.
Thank you. How has SolidFire's startup culture changed NetApp's traditional, more rigid company culture?
We're not rigid. I mean, those guys are fine. I think it's actually had a good influence, particularly in 2 areas. And you may have a comment on this from the other side. I think among our senior leaders, seeing how it operates and having the kind of discussions we have as we did going through the due diligence and into the integration has opened up their minds to a lot of this issue of, hey, we should just move faster. We're going to move faster. You know, there's a funny thing that's happened in the tech world in the last several years. It comes back to the comment about IP. The model used to be, you'll all have to buy a copy of my book when it's done. I'll give you a 20% over the retail price as early access. We used to have an industrial model of innovation, and I worked at IBM Research. We'd hire all the smart people. We'd do everything in our lab. Don't tell anybody. It's all top secret, and then we let it out. And half the time, you miss the market. And we realized that didn't work, so we went into this modern world of, let's go buy the successful startup. Someone else figured it out. There were 10 startups. One of them succeeded. We'll go buy and pay a premium for them. Oh, that doesn't work because integration is so hard. So most of those fail. We're now in a much more open model. And it's not necessarily about going and finding who the right innovator is and buying them. It's about working together collaboratively and moving very fast and worrying a little bit less about creating that moat and a lot more about moving so fast that you don't have a castle you're protecting. You're on the move. And I think that's one of the things that SolidFire culturally brings. The other thing is, I think, equally, maybe more important in the long run, is actually for the engineers. I mean, I sat down the other day. You might like this. I was with some of our engineers. We're trying to talk about this little project. It's kind of a prototyping project, but it's complicated. There's a lot of architecture and so on. And they came back and they said, "Yeah, we think we can probably flesh this out and build the version 1 in 18 months." I said, "I was thinking 6 weeks." And they said, "No, we said 18 months, not 18 weeks." I said, "Yeah, I said 6 weeks. You said 18 months. There's a big gap." And they said, "We can't get it done in 6 weeks." I said, "We're not going to get it done. We're going to get this much of it done. And then we're going to do a little more and a little more." And again, very much like the open software world, we have a vision of where we want to get to, but we don't wait to get it all done. And whereas I think traditionally as integrated systems providers, that's the model. I can't ship this until it's perfect because once it's out of my hands, it's too hard to fix it or update it or change it. Software world is way different. Software as a service or software delivered, even faster. So that's a big cultural change. And I think a lot of the value that the SolidFire model, which says, hey, we're a software company. Yeah, we ship it on this piece of hardware, but we don't influence that. We don't have to do heavy integration testing. We don't have to go and design it. We don't have to have a supply chain problem. We don't have those things that slow us down. Being able to move fast also means we have a different view of innovation and IP protection and all that. I think that's a big part of what we're learning both at the top and at the operating engineer level.
So you talk about accelerating the world of software. I think Brocade is, Dave Meyer made this comment a couple of years ago, and really it's just stuck in my head that the IP you've created in the past is not what drives your business. Your ability to be creating an IP was drives your competitiveness. In the world of software, it's a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of well-known ways of creating software manufacturing lines using different tools, technologies, and processes to achieve that. How do you feel, or how do you see the tension between the lightning speed of modern software development now, and the differing speed of electrical engineering and the hardware manufacturing side, and how NetApp has to play in both sides of that business? What's your thoughts on that?
I think they're getting decoupled. I think you see that. I mean, SolidFire is a classic example. They are decoupling that. They're going to move from one platform, hardware platform, to another over time, but they're not gated by that. If that platform is delayed a little bit because the electrical engineers take too long, then they'll be a little later. If it's accelerated, they can move faster. So I think that we used to do this much more monolithically and more integrated, and that was the thing that slowed us down. The thing I thought you were going to ask about, and I think this is the other critical element, is the model for software development is also in itself changing. Much more compositional, component-based, the ability to pick up pieces here and there. I will call it a dirty little secret, but among this group, it's not a secret at all. If you look at our core software that we have in our products, a lot of it we didn't write. Thank God. Because it was components we got elsewhere. Some of it's open source, some of it's other free software under other license terms. Some of it we pay for, but we didn't have to build everything. And I think this is a natural thing that happens in industries. So I'll make one prediction for you. It'll probably take 5 years to find out if I'm right, so by then I won't care, but you might. If you look at pretty much any industry that is a technologically based industry, they start out vertically integrated. Ford's River Rouge plant had a steel mill at one end, iron ore came in by ship, and cars came out the other end. IBM used to grow silicon ingots because they couldn't get a supplier to make silicon wafers. So then they built their own optical steppers, and they had to build the whole supply chain. And then Amazon today and the big hyperscalers, we argue, well, they put everything together themselves. I don't think that's sustainable. I think there's going to come a day when the hyperscaler cloud providers are going to look to others for more than they do today. They're not just going to buy low-level components and build everything themselves. They're going to say, wait a minute, I'm not in the business of building infrastructure software. I'm in the business of servicing customers, providing development environments, building onboarding tools, management, whatever it might be, operating a service. Why do I have thousands of programmers writing infrastructure software?
So, question about that: do you or do you not believe that the web scale heavy participation, leadership in open source projects like OpenStack, OPNFV, the different SDN solutions that are out there, and the large number of open source projects, I believe that is effectively they're sharing the burden of innovating with other operators.
I think they are, and that's the precursor to the point where they say, why are we carrying so much of this weight ourselves?
So you believe that they'll stop working as a community and start purchasing again?
I think the purchase model will be different, but I think they will look to other parties to package and deliver what comes out of that community. So it's not just they'll still add intellectual capital. I mean, I'm sure Ford Motor Company has somebody talking to the spark plug manufacturers about how to build better spark plugs for their cars, but they don't make spark plugs. They could. I'm sure there's probably an engineer right now in Ford saying, we should make spark plugs. I have this great idea. I want to build our own spark plugs. But the company looks at it and says, not our business. And I think we'll see more of that. Today, you see people in the Amazons and others who are adding value into the community, getting the help, but then they bring it back in-house and they make their own secret sauce and they do their thing. I think that's what's going to change. My belief. By the way, a lot of people don't agree with me. Most people don't agree with me.
I'm curious about learning about it, really. It's not challenging.
No, I mean, it's a point of view, and we'll have to see how it evolves.
Yeah, how do you think that'll influence pricing? So, like, Yahoo has a great policy. If it costs more than $400,000 a year to license, they'll put 2 core devs in an open source project and not buy it from packages. Sound business.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think that's driving the componentization and the pricing around a lot of this stuff for all of us.
And just to echo back what you just said, so you believe that the shifting development and purchasing model on the web scale in combination with open source, that a model that you believe will occur in the next 5 years will be as enterprise companies or manufacturers start breaking apart their product into smaller products that fit below that whatever $100, $200, $300, $400,000 purchasing boundary?
I think that's part of what will happen. I think the other thing is if you look at enterprise computing over the last several years, companies, I don't know if I should say it this way because some of our customers will be offended, but I think it's true. They got kind of lazy. And so they relied on integrators, the IBM Global Service or Accenture or someone else to take care of that. And then the bill got really big. And I think that as it becomes easier to more componentize, more Lego-like, and I can put these things together, they will, composable systems, they will come back and say, rather than relying on these guys, I'm going to hire a small number of really smart guys who know how to build things out of these bricks. I'm not going to build all the bricks myself, which is sort of what Amazon does. I'm not going to build customized bricks. But I'm going to rely on those bricks, and I'm going to put them together in a way that optimizes what I need. And I think this is exactly what, it's interesting. I was hearing from some people who are not close to OpenStack over the last year. Well, it's not mature, it's too complicated, it's really expensive, we can't adopt it, it's probably a fad. I said, yeah, that's what they said about Linux 10 years ago. I remember being with the large New York banks in the late 90s, and they were fighting to do it, and they wanted to do it, and it was hard, and they had to have big teams, and then it got easy. And in many cases today, they're buying Linux without even knowing it, because you're buying a product. The producer of the product is benefiting from that community investment. And, I don't care what operating system it is. What operating system's inside that camera? Who knows? But I'll bet you it might be open source. He probably knows. It might be open source because the manufacturer doesn't need to have that. The secret sauce they have is putting all the pieces together, not building the pieces.